Welcome, everyone, to the October Alumni Lunch and Learn for the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at Virginia Commonwealth University. My name is James Wazalewski, and I'm the Director of Development for the Wilder School. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our session today will feature our guest speaker, Mr. Chris Piper, as well as our moderator, Ms. Shajuana Isom-Payne, for the presentation and discussion about protecting the integrity of the vote. As a reminder, we are recording this session as well as the question and answer portion. This includes comments in the chat. We are pleased to have each of you here for our session as we continue our efforts to engage and evolve our alumni and our community. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Susan Gooden, Dean and Professor at the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs. Dr. Gooden.
Thank you so much, James, and welcome everyone as we continue to host our Wilder School Alumni Lunch and Learn series, which has been a tremendous success and a way to bring issues, current contemporary issues facing us in the community to a larger forum and a larger group. And as James said, we're delighted today to be hearing from Chris Piper, who is Commissioner of the Virginia Department of Elections. Before we get to that, I did want to share with you a couple of exciting things that are going on at the Wilder School that are directly related to this topic. We were selected, the Wilder School was selected as a CNN 2020 presidential election poll. Our Commonwealth poll that many of you know has been directed through the Center for Public Policy and is under the leadership of Dr. Robin McDougall. This presidential poll, this Commonwealth poll continues to get national attention. Results from the poll are being shared in such places as the Washington Post and the New York Times. And it really just cements the rigorous nature of the poll and that it meets the gold standards for public opinion research nationally. So we're very pleased with that distinction and the great contribution that's coming from the Commonwealth poll. And related to that, just wanted to share before you some of the results from the September 2020 poll. And you have these before you. I won't read them all, but particularly germane to today's session, you'll see on the right-hand side, the middle block, 50% of Virginians, and the Commonwealth poll, of course, surveys Virginians, are confident that mail-in votes will be accurately cast and counted. So the fact that 50% of folks are confident and 50% are not, I think brings to the fore the importance of today's topic, which is protecting the integrity of the vote here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I'm pleased to share that we will have the October 2020 poll that will be released. So we have one more poll that's going to be released next week on Thursday. So stay tuned for the latest in terms of Virginians' opinions relative to the upcoming election, as well as other issues that are impacting Virginians nationally. So with that, I will turn it over to Shajuana Isom-Payne, who is our Assistant Dean of Student Services, who has agreed to serve as the moderator for today's panel. So Shajuana.
Thank you very much, Dean Gooden, and thank you to all of you for joining us today for our October Wilder School Alumni Lunch and Learn. And I want to welcome you to this important and certainly timely discussion on protecting the integrity of the vote, involving this November election, voter advocacy, and access to voting. We are certainly living in unprecedented times, and as we are immersed in an economic crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, and continued unrest of racial inequities and social justice, these crises impact how we live and work, and it's imperative to understand the unique challenges that the Commonwealth of Virginia faces in respect to the voting process. It's state agencies such as the Virginia Department of Elections that are at the forefront of leading our Commonwealth and maintaining equitable practices that are inclusive of the needs of all Virginians in the voting process. And it certainly is critical to address concerns, build on innovation, and adhere to practices that result in accessibility for all. Today, our featured speaker is Mr. Chris Piper. Mr. Piper was appointed Commissioner of the Virginia Department of Elections in January 2018. And after earning a bachelor's degree in political science from Virginia Commonwealth University, Mr. Piper began his career in elections and government ethics as a manager of a large trade association's Federal Political Action Committee. He later led the Virginia State Board of Elections Campaign Finance Division. Chris then worked as a political compliance consultant for a multinational law firm, then returned to the State Board of Elections to manage the Election Services Division before becoming the Commonwealth's first executive director of the Virginia Conflict of Interest and Ethics Advisory Council. With a focus on election security and uniform application of laws, regulation, and policies, he is dedicated to protecting the integrity of the Commonwealth's ethics and elections. Recently, Mr. Piper led the partnering efforts with the Wilder School for the Virginia Department of Elections to serve as a sponsoring agency for the Wilder Graduate Scholar Fellowship Program. Through that sponsorship, our graduate students have had the opportunity to directly contribute to the operations of the department and gain invaluable insight and professional development as a future policymaker. We are certainly grateful to Mr. Piper and to the Virginia Department of Elections for supporting the Wilder Graduate Scholar Fellowship Program. And so please do join me in welcoming Mr. Piper as our speaker today. Mr. Piper.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group and to give back to VCU, which really just gave me so much. I'm going to go through a few things today, basically how we got here, but I think it's sometimes important to talk about how I got here to kind of explain where we are today with elections in Virginia. So just a little bit of background on me beyond my career. I was raised in Northern Virginia, right outside of DC. And when I was a kid, the news in DC it was national news. It was, the president and Congress and the Supreme Court, and I soaked it up. I just found that stuff very exciting. And so I remember being a young kid, and it was 1984, and President Reagan was up for re-election against Walter Mondale, and I had no political leanings. I was only 7, so I didn't really lean one way or the other, and that actually turned out to be my entire career. But back then, I was more concerned about the fact that I only had memories of Reagan as president. And so I was very, very concerned that he would not be president anymore. And I didn't know how to say the Mondale administration. These were the things going through my head. So I'll never forget election night. I came home and I'm watching the election returns that night with my mom. And I asked her, I said, Mom, well, who did you vote for? And she said, well, whatever you do, don't tell your grandparents, but I voted for Reagan. And this to me was a very impactful moment in my life. And the reason being is that this simple decision, this decision to make that she made in the voting booth, in my little 7-year-old brain, seemed like it was going to tear our family apart. Like we would never see our grandparents again. And of course, that's not true. But in my mind, it had such an impact that voting was so important, that it was such a critical thing that we get to do. And that decision had such an impact in my little world, but not only in my little world, but throughout the entire country. So as I was growing up, I continued to be interested in American government, American history, and American politics. And in 1992, Bill Clinton was running against George H.W. Bush. And MTV back then was the cultural phenomenon that we all paid attention to. And they had a program called Rock the Vote. And it was, it's still around, obviously, but then it was a fairly new, a new instance. And so I was excited about it because it was engaging young people and encouraging them to register to vote and then actually go out to the polls and vote. Disproportionately, we still see younger Americans are not registering to vote in the same numbers as the older Americans. And to me, it was really important because I felt like if you wanted your voice to be heard, the first thing you had to do was the one thing that you know you had control over, which is cast your ballot, make your voice heard through the ballot box. And then from there, that can start the conversation that you can have with the elected leaders. And so I was very involved in that, and that continued. And I actually started college at James Madison University, and I found that it was a fine school, but my brother was going here to VCU, and I had some other friends that were going to VCU, and I would come here and visit. And the thing that struck me about VCU, and something that I wasn't getting at James Madison at the time, was the diversity of the groups that attended VCU. And so I decided to go ahead and transfer into VCU, and I can't tell you how much that impacted me. Before, I was in class with other people who looked like me, who talked like me, who had the same views as me. When I came to VCU, I had older students in the class with me, younger students. I had people from different backgrounds and different countries and different socioeconomic classes. And that, to me, really having all of that perspective and all of those discussions that I had in those classes at the Wilder School was so critical to me and my development, and I think has helped me as I've gotten into my career. Certainly the best thing that best decision I ever made in my college career was going to VCU. So anyway, that's kind of how I got into elections. I was very excited about elections from a very young age, and VCU helped foster all of that. So very quickly, I want to kind of go over how we got to where we are in this election here in Virginia. So like most Americans, I woke up on January 1st and was excited about 2020, but also incredibly nervous. At the time, the biggest concern that we had was the security of our elections. We all know what happened in 2016, and if you're not sure, I can tell you very clearly, every single state in the United States of America was targeted by Russia in 2016, and that includes Virginia. Our website was scanned. They were essentially looking for a way in to access our database or other information on our website to at the very least, make Americans question the integrity of the election. And that scared all of us, and should have scared all of us. And we were working very hard over the past 4 years, and especially since I came on board, to address any sort of issues that may come up. The problem is that, like, in 2016, obviously Russia didn't find a way in to Virginia's systems. They didn't do anything to us. They did in a couple of, in Illinois and a couple of localities, they were able to breach those systems. They didn't do anything that could have affected the vote or the final results. We know that for a fact. So what we were really concerned about in Virginia wasn't that we were already in a good posture. We were in a very strong security posture. But these people are professionals, and they were going to continue to work at it. And so we had to stay one step ahead of the bad guys. So I woke up on January 1st, and that was my number one concern. And obviously, we've done a lot of work to address those issues. So in Virginia, for example, we all vote on paper ballots. People will come to me and say, well, it's 2020. Why are we still voting on paper? Because paper is the most perfect record that we can have in an election. So we mark that paper ballot, we feed it through the machine. If there's ever any question about the ultimate results of the election, we have that paper ballot to go back to, refer to, recount it if we need to. We also audit the elections here in Virginia. So we have that paper record, and we can be sure of the will of the voter utilizing that paper record. We've also formed partnerships from the federal government with the Department of Homeland Security, FBI, and others, as well as our state and local law enforcement and cybersecurity professionals, the National Guard, the state police, the Fusion Center. These are all strong partnerships that we meet with on a regular basis to address any concerns And we will be and have been communicating daily on any threats or concerns that may be coming up. That is the best thing that we've done, I think, over the last 4 years, is really strengthen those partnerships. Communication is really key when it comes to protecting our election. But then March came, and I think you all can relate that it flipped our world and turned it upside down. So I'm going to quickly go through some of the issues that have come up from an election administration perspective. So let's talk about what Virginia has done. In 2016, 12%, just 12% of our voters who turned out for the election in 2016 voted early. They voted on either absentee by mail or they voted early in person. Big reason for that was because you needed an excuse to vote early. So in earlier this year, prior to the pandemic, the General Assembly and the governor had already come to an agreement and signed into law no excuse absentee voting, and for the entire 45-day period before the election. So that meant that anybody who wished to vote prior to election day no longer needed an excuse. They could just show up, or they could just request a ballot by mail. So if you think about it, 88% of the voters who turned up in 2016 turned up on election day in that short 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Window on election day. That also means that at least 88% of our electorate in 2016 are not experienced at requesting a ballot by mail. So that was the first challenge. What's gonna happen? You're gonna expect people who are afraid or cannot leave the house or are unable to in a situation where they're at high risk. They're not gonna wanna show up on election day to cast a ballot. Maybe not even go in person because of the risk of exposure. So the question immediately was, do we go to an all-mail state? And in Virginia, we chose not to do that. And the reason was because I talked about communication. We communicated with other states around the country. We discussed the positives and the negatives of moving to that. And what we found was that if you're looking at a state that's only had at highest amount 12% voting early and 6% of those doing it through the mail, you risk really confusing and frustrating the electorate during a time when they need to have confidence in the election. So we decided in Virginia to move to a multi-platform situation, and I'll go over that in a little bit. The other issue we had is historically, election officers in Virginia are of the high risk category just by virtue of their age. So we went on a huge election officer recruitment. And what we found was that people in this pandemic, Virginians from all over the Commonwealth stepped up. It's been inspiring to see. We had over 20,000 individuals sign up to be election officers in the Commonwealth this year. And that is really exciting to see. We've never seen anything like that in previous years. We're always struggling to find election officers. And the younger generation of Virginians have really stepped up, but it's been an inspiring moment. So we talk about the different platforms that we had to work with. Well, so in Virginia, again, the majority of our electorate by far has been used to showing up on election day to vote in person. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to create a situation that expanded that expanded the ability for people to vote in different ways, whichever way they felt comfortable. As the governor says quite often, you shouldn't have to choose between your health and your right to vote. So what we've done in Virginia is you can request an absentee ballot by mail. And by the way, the last day to do that is this Friday at 5 p.m. Once you get that ballot in the mail, you can mark it and you can put it back in the mail. We've added things like tracking that ballot, et cetera, to ensure that you know where the ballot is in the process. You can also now take that ballot and drop it off either at the General Registrar's office, at a satellite voting location, or at the polling place on election day. So there are options available to you. Of course, with the no excuse absentee, you can always go in person. We have satellite locations in localities around the Commonwealth, as well as the General Registrar's office and at the polling, and at the General Registrar's office. So you can vote in person. We've gotten very, very positive reports about how that process is going. It's just like Election Day. You just do it at a time of your choosing. And last but not least, of course, if you want to vote in person on Election Day, we are able to do that, and we're able to do that safe in a sanitary manner. We've partnered with the CDC, the Virginia Department of Health, and what's called the Medical Reserve Corps. This is a group of medical professionals who volunteer their time during times like this in the pandemic. They are at the polling places. They will be monitoring for social distancing, checking to see if they notice anybody who may have symptoms, and offer them curbside voting so that they don't have to be in line or exposing the election officers. We've also provided personal protective equipment to all of our elections officers, including masks, face shields, gloves. They have hand sanitizer and disinfectant to wipe down the surfaces. So we've worked really, really hard to ensure that every voter has an opportunity to vote. We've worked with our localities on various ways to ensure that the process moves quickly and effectively. So I want to tell you how successful we've been. As of today, we have over 1.5 million voters having already cast a ballot for the 2020 election. That's so incredible. When you look back at 2016, for the entire election, we had 566,000 voters cast a ballot prior to Election Day. And then we had 3.5 million voters show up on Election Day to cast their ballot. Here in Virginia, it's October 21st, and we've already had nearly over 1.5 million voters cast their ballot. We still have a week and a half of early voting to go, plus we have a ton of absentee ballots that are still making their way through the process and will be marked as received here soon. So if we look at it, we've had 900,000 people show up in person to vote early. Just yesterday alone in Virginia, 88,400 voters cast a ballot in person. That is remarkable. So we will see, as so far, that's about 39% of the turnout that we've had in 2016. So we're going to see a large number of votes already cast before we even get to Election Day. So that's really important and critical. And then just, I'm gonna have a chance to answer a lot of questions. So I'm happy to do that, but I wanna remind people, when we talk about trust and integrity in the system, I think it's important to remember one very critical thing. Elections are conducted by your friends and your neighbors and members of your family, probably. We are regular people who are dedicated and passionate about securing your vote. It's not just these political people, it is really people like you and your friends and your neighbors who are out here working hard every day to ensure the integrity of the election. And I think that that's the most critical thing that we can remember. This process is done by fellow Americans, and we matter, and we want your vote to matter and your vote to count. And we work hard every day to make sure that happens. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. And I'm here to answer any questions that may come up.
Thank you so much, Mr. Piper. Very enlightening, really informative. Appreciate that commentary there, and certainly your passion and dedication to integrity of our voting process. So I have a question for you. Unfortunately, we have seen some instances of voter suppression manifest in various ways, such as barriers to voter registration process, restrictions on casting ballots, discriminatory or partisan rigged district maps. How would you say policies or practices are in place? What policies and practices in place to address combating that voter suppression? And specifically, if we look at historically marginalized groups?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is we have to ensure that every vote is treated the same. And I mean that, so I actually had spoke to a bunch of 8th graders the other day, and I thought of this analogy. If I go to a McDonald's in Richmond and I order a Big Mac, I expect that Big Mac to look a certain way and taste a certain way. Now, if I drive out to Roanoke and I order a Big Mac, I'm going to expect that Big Mac to look a certain way and taste a certain way. And it's probably, and it needs to be the same way as I got in Richmond. The fact of the matter is that the first thing we can do is uniformity in our election laws and the application of our election laws. To ensure that if I go to a polling place in Richmond, I'm going to have the same or similar experience as a polling place in Roanoke. And so those are the most important things. I think we also have to realize that access to the ballot is a critical function. And so breaking down those barriers in order to allow for anybody who is eligible to vote the opportunity to vote. And so that also means looking at things such as restoring the rights of felons, talking about photo identification. There are ways that we can prove who you are without necessarily having a photo identification. The other thing are just simple practical things. We've seen lines in other states. We see them here in Virginia, and in some cases, it's a good thing. We see people who are enthusiastic, that are willing to wait in line, and they're happy to get out there. This year, especially with 6 feet between everybody, you're going to see a little bit longer lines. But there's things that we can do. For example, making sure that we put more election officers in more dense areas where we know there's a larger population. A larger population of people tends to be an area that may be a historically disenfranchised group. So we need to focus our attention on those areas and making sure that there are plenty of election officers to move those lines very quickly. Putting the resources like voting machines, et cetera, so that people can move through those lines very quickly. Those are just small little things that we can do. The only other thing I would say on the other side is advocating for election laws. Elections don't happen once every 4 years. They happen, especially in Virginia, every 6 or 7 days, I think. It feels like. But the point being is that recognizing that elections have consequences and advocating for election laws that will reduce some of these barriers to the process.
Thank you very much. We do have some questions coming in from our audience. And Lindsay has a question regarding some links in the statistics that you shared. She asks, is there a link where the Board of Elections shares these current voting statistics? These are very encouraging, and it would be great if we can share these more widely.
Sure. So there is on our website, we do, if you go to election results and you go to our statistics page, you'll see some of this information. The better place, honestly, Virginia Public Access Project is taking this information and making it, they do a great job kind of translating this information. Another one, if you're looking not just for Virginia state statistics, but if you go just Google Elections Project, Michael McDonald from the University of Florida has a great website where you can see these statistics from around the country. So I would encourage you to utilize all of those resources. Of course, you can use our website, and I'm happy to share that with you, but I did want to point out some other websites that are available.
Thanks. Thanks everyone for sending in these questions. We have a couple more here. Alonda asked, excuse me, when are this year's results likely to be available? and wonders should they be incredulous if news organizations start projecting winners on election night?
Yes. You should have always been incredulous. I hate to say that. But look, never in the history of humankind have we known the winner of an election on election night. What we've had are predictions. We've had talking heads believe they know the answer. I think the first time we saw a real, on a large scale issue of this was in 2000. They started calling the election. And what they found out was, we still have to actually, count and recount these results. Look, on election night, we've always had unofficial results and predictions made from those unofficial results combined with like exit polling. But I'll tell you how it really works as quickly as I can. So on election night, here in Virginia, we'll have election day results coming in immediately after the polls close. So you'll start to see those trickling in a little after 7 p.m. This year. So that everybody who voted on election day, you'll start to see those precincts filling in. What we have this year that's different from previous years. Like I said, in 2016, we only had 560,000 votes that came in early. All of those are done on what's called a central absentee precinct. This year, that still exists. The difference is, as of today, we have 1.5 million votes already cast in the central absentee precinct. On top of that, we have two other things going on. First, the incredible number of mailed-in ballots, much higher than any previous year. Those will continue to come in. And this year in Virginia, we have expanded the period of time in which those can be returned. So as long as they're postmarked on election day, we will continue to receive those, and they will be counted if they're in the office of the General Registrar by noon on Friday, November 6th. So that means that even on election night, we will still have ballots coming in over the next 2.5 days that will have to be processed and counted. You've heard a lot about election week, probably, or election, I'm calling it election season now, but election week. So in some states, those absentee ballots by mail, they can't touch them. States like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, you may have heard of them because they're pretty critical swing states this year. They can't touch those ballots until election night. The problem with that is it takes a long time, relatively speaking, to process those ballots. We have to check them. They have to be checked in to make sure that they haven't already voted. They have to ensure that the information that they filled out on those envelopes are correct. And then they have to open them in front of a big, in Virginia anyway, we have to do that in front of a Republican representative and a Democratic representative, plus a couple unaffiliated election officers. All that has to be done and coordinated. So it takes time. Now, in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the three biggest swing states that have this issue, they can't touch those until election day or just a couple of days beforehand. In Virginia, we're already doing it. We've been doing it since September 18th. Localities are setting up these meetings where they're opening them up and they're running the ballots to the machine. So what we've told the registrars in the localities around the Commonwealth is you need to process everything you can from that central absentee precinct as much as you can until 11 o'clock. And then at 11 o'clock, we just have to cut it off, and you have to report all of those in-person votes and all of the mailed ballots that you've received up to that point. And then through the next 2.5 days, they will continue to process the absentee ballots that have come in and that keep coming in through Friday at noon. And in most cases, a little after Friday at noon, they'll update their central absentee precinct results, and we'll start to have some final unofficial numbers. Some localities like Fairfax County, I can see that process taking till Sunday or even Monday before it's done. So we will continue to have unofficial results at least until Monday. Now that's not a big deal if it's wide margin and there's not enough for it to sway the election one way or the other, but it is a big deal if it's a close race. So it will be several days. And I think nationally speaking, you're definitely looking at several days to weeks before we have final results in some states. That's a critical piece. I will say this: in Virginia, the locals have to be done by Tuesday, November 10th, and the state board has to certify the election by Monday, November 16th. So we will be done by the 16th, I assure you. But other states will have some more time to work on that. I know that's a long answer, but I want to make sure I was thorough in that, because it is going to be critical, especially because I think there's been a lot of talk about anything that happens after the election, or we have to know the night of the election. Guess what? We've never known, and we never will, because we need to have time to go through and check and certify the results.
No, that was extremely helpful. Thank you so much for that, because that was actually related to another question that had come in as well. But as we're talking about mail-in ballots, can you share with us ways in which the Department of Elections has collaborated, and to what extent, and communicated with the USPS to ensure accuracy and adherence to the process for absentee and mail-in ballots?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's relates to my point earlier, is that not just the voters, the state itself, the United States Postal Service, and the regional reps that we have here, and the employees of the Postal Service here in Virginia, while they've always done great working with us and prioritizing our ballots, they've never seen the volume that we've seen when it comes to mail-in ballots either. So it's a process that we need to build to get to be more experts at it. But that said, as soon as the pandemic hit, we knew more ballots were going to be coming in through the mail. So while we already had a good working relationship with the United States Postal Service, it improved even better. The communication became even stronger. For months, we've been meeting every other week. And then as we've gotten close to the election, it's been more like every day. And we certainly have good communication. We are aware that that there are parts of their system that they've had to refine and that they've had to work through. And we've been working with them to refine our communication and what we're providing to them. So it's been a great partnership. Don't always believe everything you hear. The regional reps and the state employees here in Virginia are fantastic to work with, and we've had very good experience with them.
Great, thank you. So we do have some other questions coming in. Paula first wants to give a thank you, Commissioner Piper, for your remarks. And she's curious to know what guidance you have given localities regarding early voting access, number of locations, hours, etc.
Right, so the localities are required to at least have their general registrar open, that office open for early voting. After that, and with the drop-off legislation that came through in the special session this year, they're required to have drop-off locations at their registrar's office and at the polling places. They can have additional drop-off locations throughout the locality if they so choose, and so many localities have done that. With regards to satellite voting, the requirements in the law are that there's no mandatory minimum number of satellite locations or mandatory satellite locations for each locality, because it varies so much. I mean, obviously a place like Fairfax County or the city of Richmond, or even, we get into Tidewater, they're going to need quite a bit more to ensure that they have lesser lines, et cetera. But some localities may have a lot of voters, but some localities just have different needs, and so requiring a minimum wasn't right. But what the law does require is that the governing body has to establish those polling places and those satellite locations. So it's not just it's not just the registrar making the decision. It has to go through the public vetting process to ensure that the satellite locations are put in places where they're needed. And that whoever makes those final decisions are ultimately answerable to the voters themselves.
Thank you. Dean Gooden has a question for you. And again, she thanks you for this informative presentation. Could you please give us a sense of the priorities of the Virginia Department of Elections when an election is not imminent?
So in Virginia, an election is always imminent. But next year we'll be turning around and having, we're going to have to redistrict. It's a redistricting year. It'll, with the census and the pandemic, it's, there's going to be a lot of quick turnaround on that. We'll also be preparing for the gubernatorial election as well as the House of Delegates and numerous local elections. I will say, in my time here, we're always doing elections. So my goal has been here at the department to ensure that the staff has the skills, that they have efficiencies in place, that there's documentation, that there's policies and procedures just internally, because we don't have time necessarily to be, playing with things or whatnot. We have to be able to turn on a dime, and making sure that every person is in the office is in a place where they can succeed and has the resources to be successful. That's been the goal of my term here. And I'll give a shout out to my friends Jim and Linda at the Performance Management Group. I've worked with them. They've done great work to help us with our efficiency. But more than that, I've attended the Performance Management Group's Virginia Executive Institute and the Commonwealth Management. Those have really helped me in getting those, putting our agency in a place of success. And I think that if I can toot my own horn for a second, I will. When we turned on this pandemic, we were in a very good place to just go ahead and switch up everything that we were doing and prepare for this election, because we had put these policies and procedures in place and put people on a path to success. So I think that's my goal on a day-to-day basis and my priority. On a elections forefront, though, it's always about ensuring that we increase access to the polls, make it easier for the voters to register, making it ironing out any kinks in the system that would prevent a voter from having their vote count. That is the most important thing that we do. But I think that starts by making sure that we're all working hard and put ourselves in a place to succeed, so we can do that for the voters.
Great. John asks, could you share with us how you will spend November 3rd? How will you be monitoring the voting process? Who will you be talking to, and what will your routine be like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish everybody could see it. It's my favorite day of the year. And I've been in elections, as you mentioned at the beginning, I've been in elections basically for the last 17 years, on and off. And an election day is like Christmas for me. And I'll go quickly through it, but I'll explain why it's like Christmas. First of all, I'm up very early, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. Election officers start arriving at polling places at 5. There's always a problem with a machine or a poll book, or maybe they can't even get into the building, and things like that. And so we're running on that. And then it's just adrenaline from then on out. What we do in Virginia, we have such great, strong partnerships with our state, federal, and local partners. We immediately open up our chat room. So we're chatting all day. But we also, and even this year, even with the pandemic, we'll all be masked up, but we'll all be in the same room, essentially, executive staff here at the department, along with our state and federal partners. So the FBI is here, Virginia State Police is here, Department of Homeland Security representatives are here, Capitol Police, National Guard, they're all in the same room. We're all talking together, and usually we're very bored, which is a good thing. But most of the time we're just solving whatever little problem comes up, working through it. I give press briefings all day. And then at the end of the night when they close up, we're just like you guys. We're sitting in front of our computers and watching the TV as the results come in. I don't have any secret, information. Like, I'm watching them show up and pop up on the computer screen just like you guys are. And it's a lot of fun. And, we're also calling localities saying, hey, where are the results? Hey, where are the results? Things like that, making sure that they're not running into any problems. I tell you why it's like Christmas. one of my first elections, I was a campaign finance guy, so I didn't really participate in the actual election process. But on election day, I had the good fortune of manning the complaint line. And in every year since then, there's always that one voter who got stuck in traffic, or maybe they didn't know where their polling place was, or just something simple as they weren't sure if they could get their disabled grandfather to the polls and get them inside. And then you tell them about curbside voting, and you hear the joy in their voice that they get to have their voice heard and that they get to cast that ballot. That is Christmas to me. At the end of the day, if I help one person vote who didn't think they were going to get the vote, man, that's the greatest thing in the world. And so I encourage you all, like, if you didn't sign up as an election officer this year, do it next year. It's an incredible experience to be part of that, and to know that you played a part in making sure somebody got that most sacred right to be accomplished in voting.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Your passion definitely shines through, and we certainly do appreciate that. We have another audience member who has a question here for you. Is it possible to view my example ballot before Election Day? And they ask, I am aware of the general lists that are available on election.virginia.gov website, but I cannot find exactly what will be on my ballot.
Yeah, the best thing to do is to go to your local voter registration office and their website to view a sample ballot. Not all of them have them. On our website, we have just found that, unfortunately, and the General Assembly has asked us to look into replacing our database, so we're working on that. But we found that we were giving it was a small number, but sometimes we were getting bad information, and it was better to give only the right information or refer them somewhere else. Another place you can go is Ballotpedia. Ballotpedia, you can type in your address and get the information on what your ballot is going to be. But if you're in the Richmond proper area, then most of those localities will be able to provide you a sample ballot from their website. That's unfortunately the best I can do at this time.
Thank you. So I want to go back to something you mentioned early in your remarks, referencing Rock the Vote. And so that took me back as well, good old MTV days. But it also made me wonder, I'm curious about, from an educational standpoint and outreach, even to K-12 schools and young children, starting to build that culture and expectation of the voting process and rights, and going into early college years. Can you talk about any educational outreach that the Department of Elections does from a K-12 or college age students?
That's a good question. So that's one of the programs we're trying to build is through our training program, not just training our local registrars and our staff, but providing more materials that can be used, around the Commonwealth, not just for adults, but also for kids. I have been going around to schools and talking about elections this year. I think maybe more than my predecessors. I honestly don't know, but I do. I'm that passion that was built in me in 1992, is something I want to share. And so for sure, what I can say, like, that we've done that's real tangible recently, for the last several years, we partnered with the League of Women Voters and other third-party or nonprofit organizations. And what they do is they've set up, along with us, first of all, the governor has declared a governor's challenge, where what they're doing is they're going out to the high schools in the Commonwealth, and they're challenging them to register their seniors to vote. And those schools that have more than 65% of their eligible seniors registered to vote get a governor's award. And they have specific websites they can go to link in, and we can track that information. So that's I think critical. I think it's great to do it at a K through 8 level, but really when you get into high school, I think that the problem that we see is that a lot of students, especially seniors, don't realize a lot of them have the opportunity to register to vote and vote in a primary prior to the general election. So we really try and get that message out as much as possible.
Great, thank you. Would you share with us, how does Virginia's elections compare to other states? Are there policies and approaches in other states that you would implement for the Commonwealth?
Oh, absolutely. So I think one of the other things that happened as a result of 2016 was we all realized, all the various states realized that we needed to communicate more. I'm on the phone every Friday with members of the National Association of State Election Directors. I actually serve on the board for that organization, but we have a call with all the member states every Friday to discuss all the things that are going on and sharing ideas. And that was never more critical than during this time. Colorado, Washington, and Oregon have been doing mail ballots for the last 10 years. And by mail ballots, I mean they actually mailed out ballots to every one of their registered voters. And then they have them come back in. They have very little in-person voting on election day. And they've been doing it, and they've been doing it successfully for 10 years. And a lot of that, and what they said to a T was, it's not something you do overnight. So that was one of the reasons we immediately said, okay, well, this is not something we can do overnight for the reasons that they stated. But there's so many other things. First of all, Virginia is the best by far, no doubt about it. But, I think that there's some innovations out there that they've done. Same day registration, that is something that's coming to Virginia in a few years. Automatic voter registration is something that's happening in Virginia, meaning you just go to the DMV and you're registered. You have to actually opt out of being registered. These are things that we've been seeing across the country, but there's just other little things, minute in the weeds type details that we look to and want to innovate in Virginia, and having those partnerships and that communication with the other states has been critical for us in improving our processes.
Great, thank you. We do have another question from the audience. Can you share, was the Department of Elections involved in the decision to move the Richmond's registrar office? Just wondering about moving it to an inaccessible location.
Yeah, so no. So the way it works in Virginia is I talked about uniformity earlier in my Big Mac analogy. So the Department of Elections, our job is to oversee the implementation of policies and processes. And our main mission is the uniform application of elections in Virginia and the election law. But the local governments and the local general registrar's offices are actually responsible for the administration of the election at the local level. And like I said before, not only the satellite voting locations, but all the polling places have to be established through an ordinance by the local government. And that includes the establishment of the general registrar's office. So that whole thing is done at the local level. Certainly, we advise and we provide guidance and information where we can, but that was 100% a local decision.
Okay, great. And so I think we have time for a final question. So I'm curious if you can share with us, what would you note as the primary gold star for the Commonwealth of Virginia in our practices from the Department of Elections? And what would you state as a significant lesson learned for wanting to follow and move forward with an improvement?
Ooh. Well, I come from the school that we can always improve. We can be content and happy with our present state, but always knowing that we can do better and looking for ways we can do better. If I was going to give us like, where can we improve? It's always just about making it easier. We have online absentee ballot requests. You can do that online. You can apply to register to vote online. All of that, it makes it a whole lot easier and a lot more efficient. But there's ways that we can make it even easier. We need to expand to different languages statewide. That is really critical. I think one thing we've learned this year is that while I think Virginia does a great job assisting and making sure that the disabled community can vote, we can continue to improve there. Especially during a pandemic, it's really difficult for the disability community to get out and vote. And so we need to improve in that process. We need to do it in a safe and secure way, but we need to do it, we need to do better in that realm. But as far as the gold star, I think that, I think that Virginia is a leader in the way we prepare for elections. Part of that is because we get so much practice, but government officials get criticized, and I criticize myself. I have meetings to prepare for a meeting that's preparing for a meeting. But that's important to what we do in Virginia. I am constantly in meetings with the federal government, with the state, other partners. I've talked about it a lot because it's so critical. The best thing you can do, I was never a Boy Scout, but the best thing you can do is be prepared. And that's the final point I'll make, Shajuana, if I can. I'm so glad you all attended today. One of the things that was frustrating at the beginning of this pandemic was getting on Twitter, which is always frustrating. You shouldn't do it. But anyway, if you're on Twitter and you're an election official, it was amazing how many experts in election administration were on Twitter. I had never known how many people were telling me how to do my job. And I appreciated them very much, obviously. But the point is that there are a lot of misinformation, a lot of disinformation out there. There's a lot of people assuming how we do elections. And I can tell you, the best trait of an election administration official is we sit around thinking of the worst case scenario and we prepare to prevent it, or we're preparing to get back up and running if it does happen. That's what we do all day. So I assure you, if you have a question, don't hesitate to ask us. We will be able to tell you that we've already thought of it and we have a plan against it. We have a plan to prevent it or a plan to get back up and running to prevent any long-lasting damage. That's our job. That's what we do. So whatever conspiracy theories you hear out there, I promise you we've already made a plan against it. So please feel free to ask. We'll be happy to get you a response that will make you feel a whole lot better about the process.
Commissioner Piper, thank you so very much. Really, really enlightening, wonderful words, lots of insight, great direction, and again, exuding your passion. We look forward to certainly continuing engagement with leaders such as yourself. And thank you so much to the audience for your amazing participation and for everyone attending today. I'm going to turn it over at this time to James Wasilewski.
Thank you again, Mr. Piper, Assistant Dean Isom-Payne, and Dean Gooden for this incredible presentation and conversation. Absolutely phenomenal conversation. Wonderful questions from our participants today. Thank you so much for that. Also, thank you to our participants for being here today. We'll continue to do these and be engaging, and we look forward to more of these sessions with you. We hope you will complete the survey about today's session in order to help us. This also includes suggestions for future topics for the Wilder School Alumni Lunch and Learns. The recording of the session will be made available, as we mentioned earlier, on the Wilder School YouTube site. We'll also send out an email to all of our participants, as well as those who registered, so you'll have access to the same recording. Our next session, so save the date, will be on Wednesday, November the 18th at noon with highly respected political scientist, Dr. Bob Holsworth, who will share his analysis of election 2020 with a discussion of implications at the federal and state level, including a preview of the 2021 elections in Virginia in his presentation, Election 2020 and Beyond, What Happened and What's Next? This session will be moderated by Mr. Bill Leidy, who is a Senior Strategic Advisor to the Dean of the Wilder School. Thank you again for joining us, and we will see you in November. Hey, have a great day.